The command center of the Zephyrian Empire stretched across 3 levels of the massive battle station. Admiral Cathavar stood on the highest platform. His forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the holographic displays show their latest victory. The biomechanical ships of his fleet hung in space like living creatures, their organic hulls pulsing with internal light. Each vessel was a work of art and destruction combined, grown rather than built, shaped by centuries of genetic engineering and technological advancement. The Kepler system had fallen in just 6 hours. Another species had learned the hard way that resistance against the Zephyrian Empire was pointless. The insectoid inhabitants had put up a decent fight with their swarm tactics, but they lacked the strategic thinking that made the Zephyrians the masters of warfare throughout the galaxy. Now their homeworld was being prepared for integration into the Empire, and their surviving population would serve in the labor castes. Cathavar's aide, Commander Veltar, approached with data tablets in his lower hands. His movements were precise and efficient, the result of military training that began before birth. All Zephyrians were bred for specific roles, and the military caste represented the pinnacle of their genetic engineering programs. "Admiral, the final casualty reports from the Kepler operation," Veltar said, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked his rank. 17 ships sustained minor damage, no losses. The enemy was eliminated with standard efficiency. "As expected," Cathavar replied, his attention still focused on the tactical displays. "Any intelligence of note from their databases?" "Standard primitive technology. They had achieved basic space travel and energy weapons, but their military doctrine was chaotic. No understanding of proper formation fighting or strategic coordination, the usual pattern for species at their development level." Cathavar nodded slowly. It was always the same story. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had expanded across the galaxy, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species that could truly challenge them in warfare. Some civilizations had superior technology in certain areas, others had larger populations or more resources, but none understood war the way the Zephyrians did. War was not just their profession, it was their art, their science, their religion. Every aspect of Zephyrian society was built around the concepts of strategic thinking, tactical superiority, and military efficiency. Their children learned battle formations before they learned to read. Their greatest heroes were generals and admirals. Their most sacred texts were treatises on warfare and conquest. The holographic star map that dominated the center of the command deck showed the current extent of their empire. Hundreds of systems, thousands of worlds, billions of subjects, all conquered through superior military planning and execution. The Zephyrians had elevated warfare to its highest possible form, and no species in the galaxy could match their skill. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Zexpri from her position at the long-range sensor station. "Unknown contact approaching the outer edge of the Vega system. Single vessel, unidentified design." Cathavar turned his attention to the sensor display. A new species making contact was always interesting, though it usually followed the same pattern. First contact, demonstration of Zephyrian superiority, surrender, and integration. Sometimes the new species was advanced enough to be useful in technical roles. More often, they joined the labor castes. "Analysis of the vessel?" Cathavar asked. "Approximately 600 meters in length. Metallic construction, angular design, no apparent biological components. Energy signature suggests basic fusion power systems. Weapon signatures are present but appear to be primitive projectile and energy-based systems." Cathavar studied the sensor data with interest. The ship's design was unusual. Most species that achieved interstellar travel had moved beyond purely mechanical construction. The Zephyrians had long since integrated biological and technological systems for maximum efficiency. This vessel looked almost archaic in its approach. "Estimated technological level?" he inquired. "Based on energy output and construction materials, approximately 7 to 8 centuries behind current Zephyrian standards, possibly a recent spacefaring species making their first exploratory mission beyond their home system." "Very well. Prepare the standard first contact protocol. Send a diplomatic vessel to intercept and deliver our terms. If they cooperate, they may earn a position in our empire's structure. If not," Cathavar left the sentence unfinished. Every officer in the command center knew what happened to species that refused the Empire's generous offer of integration. Commander Veltar checked his tactical displays. Admiral, the vessel is maintaining course toward our core systems. They show no signs of changing direction or attempting to avoid our patrols. Confidence or ignorance, Kethvar mused. Either they believe they can negotiate with us as equals, or they have no understanding of who they are approaching. Both are common among primitive species. The unknown vessel continued its approach, moving at what appeared to be its maximum speed. Its course was direct and purposeful, suggesting some kind of diplomatic mission. Most species that stumbled upon the Empire by accident changed course immediately when they detected the massive energy signatures of Zephyrian installations. Sir, should we deploy additional forces to the intercept point? Veltar asked. No need. A single diplomatic vessel should be sufficient for initial contact. If they prove troublesome, we can always add more ships. Most species are appropriately impressed by their first sight of our bioships. The psychological impact usually ends any thoughts of resistance. Kethavar had overseen dozens of first contact situations during his career. The pattern was well established and rarely varied. The new species would be overwhelmed by Zephyrian technological superiority, realize the futility of resistance, and accept integration into the Empire. Those that initially refused would change their minds after a demonstration of Zephyrian military capabilities. The tactical display, updated to show the diplomatic vessel changing course to intercept the unknown ship. The Zephyrian vessel was a work of art, its biomechanical hull shifting colors as internal processes adapted to changing conditions. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing organs, and the entire ship moved with a fluid grace that no purely mechanical construction could match. Time to intercept? Kethavar asked. 14 minutes at current speeds, Lieutenant Zexpri reported. Very well. Open a channel to Captain Mordan aboard the diplomatic vessel. Remind him to follow standard protocols. This appears to be a straightforward first contact situation. As the minutes passed, Kethavar reflected on the state of the galaxy. The Empire continued to grow steadily, adding new systems and species on a regular basis. Each conquest brought new resources, new technologies to integrate, and new perspectives on warfare. Though no species had ever provided a serious military challenge, many had contributed useful innovations that the Zephyrians incorporated into their own systems. The unknown vessel was now clearly visible on the main display. Its design was unlike anything in the Zephyrian databases, cores purely functional, with no aesthetic considerations apparent in its construction. Every surface was covered with what appeared to be armor plating, weapon emplacements, and sensor arrays. It looked less like an exploration vessel and more like a warship, though its technology level suggested it would be no match for even the smallest Zephyrian corvette. Contact established, Veltar announced. Captain Mordan reports that the alien vessel is responding to our communications. Excellent. Put the exchange on the main speakers. The command center filled with the sound of Captain Mordan's formal diplomatic address, delivered in the traditional Zephyrian manner. He explained the benefits of joining the Empire, the futility of resistance, and the various options available to the new species based on their technological capabilities and potential usefulness. The response came in a flat, mechanical-sounding voice that the translation system struggled to process. The accent was strange, the grammar structure unfamiliar. But the message was clear enough. They called themselves humans, and they declined the Empire's generous offer. Kethavar felt a moment of surprise. It had been several decades since a species had outright refused their initial offer. Most were smart enough to at least request time to consider the proposal. Sir, Veltar said quietly, Captain Mordan is requesting instructions. The humans have stated they wish to continue to their original destination and have no interest in joining the Empire. How remarkably foolish of them, Kethavar replied. Instruct Captain Mordan to deploy his escort squadron and provide a demonstration of our capabilities. Once they see our bioships in action, they will reconsider their position. It was always the same with primitive species. They needed to see Zephyrian power firsthand before they understood the reality of their situation. A few warning shots, perhaps the destruction of some non-essential components of their vessel, and they would quickly become much more reasonable in their negotiations. The tactical display showed the escort squadron moving into position around the human vessel. 6 bioships, each one capable of destroying the primitive craft with ease. Their organic hulls began to shift color, weapon ports dilating in preparation for the demonstration. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command rail as she studied the tactical displays. 23 years in the Earth Defense Force had taught her to read between the lines of any situation, and what she saw ahead didn't look promising. 6 alien vessels had moved into position around her ship, their strange organic designs unlike anything in the human databases. "Captain, incoming transmission from the lead alien vessel," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the communications station. "They're repeating their previous message with some additions." "Put it through," Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the circumstances. The bridge speakers crackled with the translated voice of the alien captain. The translation software was doing its best, but the meaning was clear enough. The Zephyrian Empire, as they called themselves, was offering humanity one final chance to surrender and accept integration into their civilization. They spoke of the benefits of serving the Empire, the protection it would provide, and the futility of resistance. What struck Chen most was the tone. Not threatening, exactly, but supremely confident. These aliens spoke like they had never encountered serious opposition before. They seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's refusal to immediately surrender. "They're broadcasting their military records, Captain," Rodriguez added. "Hundreds of conquered systems, defeated fleets, subjugated species. They want us to understand what we're facing." Chen watched the holographic display as it filled with images of alien battles. The Zephyrian vessels moved with fluid precision, their formations textbook perfect, their victories overwhelming and decisive. Every engagement shown followed the same pattern: superior numbers, coordinated attacks, and enemy forces that crumbled under organized assault. "Impressive," she murmured. "Very impressive, but also very predictable." Her first officer, Commander Jackson, moved to stand beside her. "Ma'am, they're offering us positions in their labor castes if we surrender immediately. Apparently they consider that generous." Chen almost smiled at that. Labor castes. These aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Humanity had clawed its way out of the gravity well of a hostile world, survived ice ages and plagues and wars that had lasted generations. They had fought each other for territory, resources, ideologies, and sometimes just because fighting was what humans did when they had nothing else to fight. "Any response to our request for safe passage?" she asked. "Negative, Captain. They're insisting that we either join their empire or face the consequences. They seem to believe that showing us their military achievements will convince us to change our minds." Chen studied the tactical display more carefully. The 6 alien vessels had arranged themselves in what was clearly a standard formation. 2 ships above, 2 below, and 1 on each side. Textbook encirclement, designed to prevent escape and demonstrate overwhelming force. It was exactly the kind of formation that would work perfectly against an enemy that fought by the same rules. "Captain," called out Ensign Park from the sensor station, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the alien vessels. Their weapons are powering up, but they appear to be targeting non-essential systems. Looks like they're planning a demonstration." "A warning shot," Jackson observed. "Standard intimidation tactic," Chen nodded slowly. She had used similar tactics herself when dealing with pirates or smugglers who needed convincing. Show them what your weapons could do to something unimportant, then let their imagination fill in what those same weapons could do to something vital. The problem was that these aliens had made a fundamental error in their assessment. They assumed that humanity would react the way their previous enemies had reacted, with fear, desperation, and ultimately surrender when faced with superior force. They didn't understand that humans had been facing superior force for their entire evolutionary history. Earth had tried to kill humanity with ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and hostile wildlife. Other human tribes had tried to kill them with superior numbers, better weapons, and smarter tactics. Disease had tried to kill them with plagues that wiped out entire civilizations. And yet here they were, flying between the stars in ships that could crack planets. "Captain, the alien commander is requesting our final answer," Rodriguez reported. "He's giving us 30 seconds to respond before they begin their demonstration." Chen looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They were scared once, she could see it in their eyes, but they were also ready. Every one of them was a volunteer who had signed up knowing that this mission might lead to exactly this kind of situation. Humanity's first deep space exploration mission beyond the Sol system had always carried the risk of hostile contact. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Channel open, ma'am." Chen straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly into the microphone. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Defiance. We appreciate your offer, but humanity must respectfully decline. We request safe passage to continue our mission." The response came quickly, and even through the translation software, she could hear the disbelief in the alien commander's voice. He wanted to know if they understood what they were facing. Did they comprehend the power of the Zephyrian Empire? Were they aware of the consequences of refusing their generous offer? "Rodriguez, send them our own military records," Chen said quietly. "Let them see what they're dealing with." "Aye, Captain." Transmitting historical databases now. Chen wondered what the aliens would make of human military history. Would they understand the significance of Marathon, where vastly outnumbered Greeks held off a Persian invasion? Would they grasp the meaning of Stalingrad, where humans fought house to house, room by room, for months without surrender? Would they comprehend Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans chose death over submission? Probably not. These aliens fought wars of conquest and expansion. They had never faced a species that viewed warfare as a form of expression, that turned combat into art, that made legends out of last stands and impossible victories. "Captain, they're responding to our historical data," Rodriguez reported. The alien commander sounds confused. He's asking for clarification on several battles. He wants to know why human forces continued fighting after suffering casualties that should have forced surrender. "Tell him that's just how humans fight," Chen replied. "We don't stop until we win or until we're all dead. Those are the only two ways our wars end." The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. Chen could imagine the alien commander trying to process that information, trying to fit it into his understanding of how warfare was supposed to work. "Ma'am, they're demanding that we power down our weapons and prepare to be boarded," Jackson reported. "The alien commander says our records must be fabricated. No species could sustain those kinds of casualties and continue fighting." Chen felt a familiar coldness settle over her, the same feeling she had experienced during the Martian colonial war when pirates had tried to take her transport ship. It was the moment when talking ended and fighting began, when all the complex considerations of diplomacy and politics simplified down to a single question: who was going to survive this encounter? "All hands, this is the captain," she announced over the ship's intercom. "Battle stations. Seal all compartments and prepare for combat. We're about to show these aliens how humans respond to ultimatums." The bridge erupted into controlled activity as her crew moved to their combat positions. Weapons systems came online, defensive screens activated, and damage control teams reported ready. The Defiance had been designed as an exploration vessel, but it was a human exploration vessel, which meant it was armed and armored like a warship. Humanity had learned long ago that anything sent into the unknown needed to be able to fight its way back home. "Captain, the alien vessels are moving into attack formation," Park reported. "They're powering up their weapons systems to full charge." "Very well," Chen said calmly. "Lock onto the nearest target and prepare to fire on my command. Let's see how these masters of warfare handle something they've never encountered before." Humans who refuse to quit. The tactical display showed the alien ships beginning their approach, moving with the same fluid precision they had demonstrated in their historical records. Perfect formations, coordinated movements, overwhelming firepower brought to bear in exactly the manner their doctrine prescribed. Chen watched them come and felt a grim satisfaction. These aliens had spent 3,000 years conquering species that fought by rational rules, that surrendered when faced with impossible odds, that valued survival over victory. They were about to learn that humans had never been particularly rational when it came to warfare, and they had certainly never valued survival over victory. "Fire control reports ready, Captain," Jackson announced. "Hold position," Chen ordered. "Let them get closer. I want them to understand exactly what they're attacking." The alien ships continued their approach, weapons charging, formations perfect. They moved like they had never encountered anything that could threaten them, like they had never faced an enemy that might actually fight back with any real skill or determination. Chen smiled grimly as she watched their approach. They were about to receive an education in human military doctrine. The first lesson was simple. If you want to fight with humanity, you had better be prepared to finish it. Because humans would keep fighting until on the first salvo, from the UES Defiance came without warning. Captain Mordan of the Zephyrian diplomatic vessel had been preparing to fire warning shots when his tactical officer screamed an alarm. The human ship had opened fire with every weapon it possessed, targeting not the closest vessel but the one furthest from any support. A textbook example of isolating and destroying enemy units one at a time. The targeted bioship, the ZES flowing current, had its shield stripped away in seconds by a concentrated barrage of kinetic rounds and energy beams. The human weapons were primitive by Zephyrian standards, but they were being used with a precision and aggression that was completely unexpected. All units returned fire, Morden commanded, his forearms working frantically at his control stations. Target their weapon systems and engines. Disable them for boarding. But the human ship wasn't where his targeting computers expected it to be. Instead of maintaining its position and trying to tank the incoming fire, the standard response of an outgunned vessel, it had accelerated directly toward the Zephyrian formation while simultaneously rolling to present its smallest profile to enemy weapons. The maneuver made no sense. The humans were flying directly into concentrated fire from multiple ships, ensuring that they would take maximum damage, while only being able to engage one enemy at a time. It was tactically insane. It was also working. The Defiance's angular hull shed armor plating as Zephyrian bioweapons tore into it, but the ship kept coming. More importantly, it kept firing. The human vessel had somehow managed to concentrate all of its forward-facing weapons on the flowing current, and the result was devastating. The bioship's organic hull began to rupture as human kinetic rounds punched through weakened sections. "Sir, the flowing current is reporting critical damage," his tactical officer announced. "Their biosystems are failing. They're losing attitude control." Morden watched in disbelief as the human ship performed another impossible maneuver. Instead of trying to escape from the center of the Zephyrian formation, it had somehow used the debris from the dying flowing current as cover, while pivoting to engage the next closest vessel. "How are they maneuvering like that?" he demanded. "Their ship design shouldn't allow for that kind of acceleration." "Unknown, sir. Their engineering systems appear to be based on principles we haven't encountered before. They're using their engines in patterns that should destroy the vessel's structural integrity." The tactical display updated to show the human ship's new position. It had somehow managed to put itself in a location where only two Zephyrian vessels could engage it effectively, while positioning itself to bring maximum firepower to bear on a single target. The maneuver had required the kind of split-second timing and spatial awareness that shouldn't have been possible for a primitive species. "Sir, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies," his communications officer reported. They're laughing. "Yes, sir. And they're playing some kind of music. The translation algorithms are having difficulty processing it, but it appears to be about warfare and death." Morden tried to process this information. The humans were facing overwhelming odds, had already taken severe damage, and were laughing while playing music about war. What kind of species fought like this? The Defiance continued its impossible dance through the Zephyrian formation, using debris, wreckage, and even the bioships themselves as cover and concealment. The human crew seemed to have an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional combat that the Zephyrians had never encountered. They fought like they were born in space, despite coming from a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. "Target their engines," Morden ordered. "Stop them from moving." But targeting the human ship's engines proved impossible. The vessel's design incorporated multiple redundant propulsion systems scattered throughout its hull. Destroying one seemed to have minimal impact on its overall maneuverability. Worse, the humans appeared to be deliberately using damaged sections of their ship as weapons, venting atmosphere and coolant to obscure sensors, ejecting debris to create impromptu missile clouds, even using pieces of their own armor plating as projectiles. The second Zephyrian vessel, the ZES Swift Hunter, began to list heavily as human weapons found weak points in its bioarmor. The humans had somehow identified the most vulnerable sections of Zephyrian ship design and places where the organic hulls were naturally weaker, and were concentrating their fire accordingly. "Sir, how are they targeting our weak points?" his tactical officer asked. "These are classified design specifications that no other species has ever identified." "I don't know," Morden admitted. "Continue firing. Coordinate with the remaining vessels. We still outnumber them, but coordination was proving difficult. The humans weren't fighting the way any species was supposed to fight. Instead of maintaining formation and trying to maximize their defensive capabilities, they kept moving, kept changing positions, kept presenting new tactical challenges every few seconds. The Defiant spun end over end while firing, used its own hull as a shield while maneuvering, and somehow managed to keep its most critical systems protected, while taking what should have been crippling damage. Entire sections of the human ship were open to space, but it kept fighting as if nothing had happened. "Sir, the Swift Hunter is reporting that the humans are using our own wreckage against us," came another report. "They've somehow managed to use debris from the flowing current as projectiles. They're firing pieces of our own ships back at us." Morden stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The humans had turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. Every piece of destroyed equipment, every fragment of armor plating, every drop of leaked coolant, all of it was being used as ammunition or concealment or distraction. "Orders from Admiral Kethvar," his communications officer announced. "He's dispatching additional forces to assist us." "Tell the Admiral that we don't need assistance," Mordan replied automatically. 6 vessels should be more than sufficient to handle a single primitive ship. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The Defiance had now destroyed or crippled 3 of his 6 ships, and it showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the human ship seemed to be getting more aggressive as it took damage, as if pain and destruction were somehow making its crew more effective fighters. The surviving Zephyrian vessels tried to fall back and regroup, but the humans wouldn't let them. The Defiance pursued with a relentless aggression that defied every principle of reasonable tactical doctrine. No sane commander would chase superior forces into an extended engagement when their own ship was already heavily damaged. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy spikes from the human vessel," his sensor operator reported. "They appear to be overloading their reactor systems." "Overloading? For what purpose?" "Unknown, sir, but the energy output is increasing rapidly. Whatever they're planning, it's going to be significant." Mordan watched the tactical display with growing dread. The humans were doing something that violated every safety protocol that had ever been written. They were pushing their primitive reactor systems far beyond safe operational limits, and the energy readings suggested they were preparing to channel all of that power into their weapon systems. "All ships, emergency evasive maneuvers," he commanded. "Maximum distance from the human vessel." But it was too late. The Defiance released a coordinated barrage of energy weapons powered by what appeared to be their entire reactor output. The concentrated firepower was strong enough to overwhelm the bioshields of 2 more Zephyrian vessels simultaneously, leaving Mordan's ship as the only survivor of the encounter. His tactical officer stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. "Sir, their reactor should have exploded." "No ship can channel that much energy through primitive systems without suffering catastrophic damage. And yet they did it anyway," Mordan observed quietly. The Defiance hung in space, trailing atmosphere and debris with entire sections of its hull, glowing cherry red from heat damage. By all rights, it should have been a drifting wreck. Instead, it slowly began to turn toward Mordan's position, its remaining weapons powering up for another engagement. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human vessel," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was the same flat, mechanical tone they had heard before. But now there was something else underneath it, or something that made Mordan's secondary heart skip beats. "Zephyrian vessel. This is Captain Chen. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this area before we resume firing. Consider this your only warning." Mordan stared at the display showing the human ship. Half of it was destroyed. Its crew was probably dying from radiation exposure and decompression, and they had just expended what appeared to be their entire energy reserve in a single massive attack, and they were threatening him. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked quietly. "Orders." Mordan looked at the tactical display one more time. 5 Zephyrian vessels destroyed or disabled. 1 human ship that should have been destroyed but was somehow still fighting. A crew that seemed to get more dangerous as their situation became more desperate. Admiral Kethvar stood before the massive holographic display in the command center, his forearms crossed as he studied the tactical reports from the Vega system engagement. The data made no sense. Captain Mordan was an experienced officer with an exemplary record, but his after-action report read like the ravings of a traumatized soldier. According to Mordan, A single human vessel had destroyed 5 Zephyrian ships through tactics that violated every known principle of space warfare. The humans had fought with a reckless aggression that should have resulted in their immediate destruction, yet somehow they had emerged victorious against overwhelming odds. "Admiral," Commander Veltar approached with a data tablet, "we've completed our analysis of the human vessel's performance during the engagement. The results are disturbing." "Explain." "The humans achieved a kill ratio of 5-to-1 while operating a technologically inferior vessel. They demonstrated tactical innovations we've never encountered, including the use of battlefield debris as improvised weapons and the deliberate overload of their own systems to achieve temporary performance advantages." Kethvar studied the tactical replay, watching the human ship dance through the Zephyrian formation with movements that seemed to defy physics. "Our analysis of their maneuvers? Their pilot coordination exceeds anything in our databases. They demonstrated 3-dimensional spatial awareness that suggests either advanced neural interfaces or—" Veltar paused, consulting his notes. "Natural evolutionary adaptation to complex tactical environments." "Natural adaptation? Explain." "Admiral, we've been monitoring human communications throughout the engagement. Our linguistic analysis teams have been working around the clock to decode their cultural databases. What we've discovered is unprecedented." Veltar activated his personal display, showing a complex timeline that stretched back thousands of years. Human civilization appears to have developed under unique evolutionary pressures. Their home planet subjected them to multiple extinction-level events: ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive climate shifts. Each time, their population was reduced to minimal survival levels. "Standard evolutionary pressure," Kethvar observed. "Many species face similar challenges." "Yes, sir, but the humans never developed stable, unified civilizations in response. Instead, they fragmented into competing tribal groups that fought each other for resources. For thousands of years, human societies were in constant warfare, not for expansion or ideology, but for basic survival." The timeline showed the progression of human conflicts, from primitive tribal warfare through increasingly sophisticated military technologies. What struck Kethvar was the relentless nature of it, and humanity had never experienced extended periods of peace. Every generation had been shaped by conflict. Sir, their entire cultural development was forged by warfare. Their art, their literature, their philosophy. All of it centers around concepts of struggle, sacrifice, and victory against impossible odds. They don't just wage war, Admiral. They've turned warfare into the fundamental expression of their species. Kethvar felt a cold sensation in his primary hearts. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered species that were more advanced, more numerous, and better armed than humanity. But they had never encountered a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history at war. "Show me their military doctrines," he commanded. The display filled with translated excerpts from human military manuals, historical accounts, and strategic philosophies. Kethvar read in growing amazement as concepts that were alien to Zephyrian thinking scrolled past his eyes. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability over adherence to standard formations. They trained their soldiers to think independently, to improvise when plans failed, to turn disadvantages into advantages. Their strategic philosophies spoke of acceptable casualty rates that would horrify any civilized species, of tactical approaches that assumed heavy losses as the price of victory. "Admiral, this passage is particularly relevant." Veltar highlighted a section of text. "Human military philosophy includes something they call asymmetric warfare, the deliberate use of unconventional tactics to defeat superior forces. They've developed entire strategic doctrines based on the assumption that they will be outgunned and outnumbered. Impossible. No species could sustain such an approach. Sir, human history suggests otherwise. They have multiple recorded instances of small forces defeating much larger armies through superior tactics, better motivation, and what they term force multipliers, warm environmental advantages, technological innovations, and psychological factors." The display showed a battle called Thermopylae, where 300 human warriors had held off an army of hundreds of thousands. Another showed a siege called Stalingrad, where humans had fought house to house for months, taking massive casualties but never surrendering. A third showed something called the Battle of Britain, where a small air force had defeated a much larger invasion fleet. "These are propaganda stories," Kethvar said. but his voice lacked conviction. "Admiral, we've cross-referenced these accounts with human archaeological evidence, genetic studies, and cultural artifacts. They appear to be accurate historical records. More concerning, sir, is that these represent typical examples of human military behavior, not exceptional cases." Kethvar studied the data in silence. The Zephyrian Empire had built its dominance on the principle that superior organization and overwhelming force would always triumph over inferior opponents. They had never considered the possibility of facing a species that specialized in defeating superior opponents. "Sir, there's more," Veltar continued. "Our analysis of human communications during the engagement reveals something even more disturbing. The crew of their vessel was not just fighting for survival. They appeared to be enjoying themselves." "Enjoying combat?" "Yes, sir. Linguistic analysis of their battlefield communications suggests high levels of excitement, satisfaction, and what their language terms adrenaline rush. They weren't fighting desperately for their lives, Admiral. They were fighting because they wanted to fight." The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The Zephyrian Empire had always assumed that warfare was a tool of something used to achieve specific objectives. The idea of a species that engaged in combat for its own sake, that found satisfaction in battle itself, was alien to everything they understood about civilized behavior. "Deploy the Fifth Fleet," he ordered quietly. "Sir, you heard me. I want our best ships, our most experienced crews, and our newest weapons systems. If the humans want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget." But even as he gave the order, Kethvar felt a nagging doubt. The human vessel had been outnumbered 6-1 and had emerged victorious. What would happen when they faced organized resistance? What tactical innovations would they develop when facing a fleet instead of a patrol squadron? "Admiral," Veltar said carefully, "our xenopsychology teams have completed their preliminary analysis of human behavioral patterns. They believe the humans may actually become more effective combatants when facing larger opposing forces." "Explain." "Human military history suggests that their performance improves under pressure. The more desperate their situation becomes, the more creative and aggressive their tactics become. Sir, every human military victory in their historical records was achieved when they were vastly outnumbered or facing seemingly impossible odds." Kethvar stared at the tactical display showing the location of the human vessel. According to reports, it was continuing toward the inner systems despite taking massive damage. The crew should be dead or dying from radiation exposure and system failures, but they were still flying, still broadcasting their intention to complete their original mission. "Sir, the Fifth Fleet reports ready for deployment. Admiral Zarkesh is requesting tactical parameters and rules of engagement. Tell Admiral Zarkesh that he is authorized to use any means necessary to stop the human vessel. Full deployment of bioweapon systems, unrestricted targeting, maximum firepower." "Yes, sir." "And the humans' request for safe passage?" Kethvar looked at the display one more time. The human ship was a drifting wreck that should have been destroyed hours ago, yet it continued to move towards Zephyrian core systems with the persistence of a natural disaster. Its crew had demonstrated tactical capabilities that challenged everything the Empire thought it knew about warfare. Denied. If they want to continue their mission, they'll have to fight their way through the entire Fifth Fleet. As orders were transmitted to the fleet commanders, Kethvar reflected on the situation. The Zephyrian Empire had faced rebellions, invasions, and military challenges before. They had always triumphed through superior coordination, better technology, and overwhelming force. But they had never faced a species that treated impossible odds as a normal operating condition. They had never encountered warriors who improved their performance under pressure, who found creative solutions to tactical problems, who refused to surrender even when faced with certain death. The humans were forcing the Empire to fight a kind of war they had never experienced. A war where the rules kept changing, where traditional advantages might become disadvantages, where victory would require not just superior force but superior adaptation. "Admiral," Commander Veltar said quietly, "there's one more thing. Our analysis of human cultural databases indicates that they have a concept they call Pyrrhic victory, achieving an objet. The UES Defiance drifted through space like a wounded animal, trailing atmosphere and debris in a slowly expanding cloud. Half of its hull had been torn away. Entire sections were open to vacuum. and its reactor was operating at barely 10% of normal capacity. By any reasonable standard, the ship should have been a lifeless hulk. Instead, its crew continued to work with the methodical efficiency of professionals who had long since accepted that death was a possibility and survival was something that had to be earned every day. Captain Sarah, Chen stood in what remained of her bridge, held upright by an emergency harness since artificial gravity had failed 6 hours ago. Her left arm was in a makeshift splint, her uniform was torn and blood-stained, and she had a radiation burn across half her face. She looked like she had been through hell. She was smiling. "Damage report," she ordered, her voice hoarse but steady. "Engines are down to 15%. Commander Jackson reported from his position at the emergency control station. "Life support is functional in 12 compartments. We've lost 70% of our armor plating and most of our primary weapon systems. And our secondary weapons? Still operational, ma'am." The humans who designed this ship knew what they were doing when they distributed our armament. Chen nodded with satisfaction. The Defiance had been built according to human military philosophy. Assume everything would go wrong, design for redundancy, and make sure the ship could keep fighting even after taking catastrophic damage. It was an approach that had served humanity well throughout their violent history. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the galactic core," reported Ensign Park. "Looks like our new friends have decided to send reinforcements." Chen studied the sensor display with professional interest. The approaching fleet was enormous, with at least 50 vessels, each one larger and more powerful than the ships they had already faced. The aliens were clearly taking this engagement seriously. "How long until intercept?" "At their current speed, approximately 2 hours." "Excellent. That gives us time to make repairs and prepare for the next round." Jackson looked at her with the expression of a man who wasn't sure if his captain was a genius or had suffered brain damage from the radiation exposure. "Ma'am, with respect, we're barely operational. Our weapons are running on backup power. We have no armor left and half the crew is injured. Against 50 ships, we'll do what humans have always done," Chen replied calmly. "We'll figure out a way to win." The truth was, Chen felt more alive than she had in years. The engagement with the Zephyrian patrol had been the most intense combat experience of her career, requiring every skill she had developed during 2 decades of military service. The aliens fought with textbook precision and overwhelming force, but they followed predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone willing to take calculated risks. More importantly, they didn't understand the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to warfare. The Zephyrians fought to conquer and expand their empire. Humans fought because fighting was what they did when the alternative was extinction. "Captain, incoming transmission from the lead alien vessel," the communications officer announced. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was different from the previous alien commanders a hour older, more measured, carrying the authority of high rank. Admiral Kethvar, he identified himself, commander of the 5th Fleet of the Zephyrian Empire. His message was straightforward. The humans had proven themselves to be formidable opponents, but they were now facing the full military might of the Empire. This was their final opportunity to surrender with honor and accept integration into Zephyrian civilization. Chen listened to the offer with amused interest. The alien admiral spoke of the benefits of joining the Empire, the technological advances they could share, the protection they could provide. It was a generous offer from his perspective, probably the most lenient terms the Empire had ever extended to a defeated enemy. "Open a channel," she ordered. "Admiral Kethvar, this is Captain Chen. I appreciate your offer, but I'm afraid you still don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't surrender because the odds are against us. We fight harder when the odds are against us. That's what makes us human." The response came quickly, and Chen could hear the frustration in the alien's voice even through the translation software. He wanted to know what humanity hoped to achieve by continuing this hopeless resistance. 1 ship against 50 was not courageous, it was suicide. "Admiral, let me explain something about human military doctrine," Chen replied. "We have a saying, victory or death. Not victory or surrender, not victory or negotiation. Victory or death. Those are the only 2 outcomes we consider acceptable." She paused, looking around at her crew. Every face showed the same determination, the same willingness to fight until the very end. It was an expression that had been worn by human warriors from the caves of Africa, to the battlefields of Mars, to the void between the stars. Admiral, we're going to continue toward our destination. If your ships try to stop us, we'll fight them. If we win, we'll continue our mission. If we lose, our deaths will teach our species everything they need to know about Zephyrian military capabilities. Either way, humanity benefits from this encounter. The long silence that followed suggested that the alien admiral was struggling to process this information. Finally, he responded with what sounded like genuine curiosity. What kind of species preferred death to defeat? The kind of species that conquered a hostile planet, survived multiple extinction events, and built starships in the face of impossible odds, Chen answered. The kind of species that has never known true peace because peace is a luxury we've never been able to afford. Admiral, you're not fighting a civilization that learned warfare as a tool of expansion. You're fighting a species that was forged by warfare, shaped by conflict, and defined by our refusal to quit when things get impossible. The tactical display updated to show the alien fleet moving into attack formation. Chen studied their deployment with professional interest. It was textbook perfect to multiple overlapping fields of fire, redundant command structures, coordinated movement patterns. Against any rational enemy, it would be overwhelming. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the ship's intercom. We're about to face 50 enemy vessels with superior technology and overwhelming firepower. By any reasonable standard, we should surrender immediately. She paused, letting that sink in. But we're not reasonable people. We're humans, and humans have been beating impossible odds since we first picked up rocks and decided to fight the universe itself. Today we're going to teach these aliens why humanity has never known a permanent defeat. Battle stations. The engagement that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. The UES Defiance, operating with minimal systems and a skeleton crew, managed to destroy 7 alien vessels and disable 12 more before its reactor finally failed. The human ship fought with a creativity and desperation that the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered, using everything from improvised weapons to ramming attacks to psychological warfare. When the Defiance finally went dark, Admiral Kethvar found himself staring at the tactical display in stunned silence. His fleet had achieved its objective. All the human vessel was destroyed, its crew was dead, and the immediate threat was eliminated. But it had cost him nearly a third of his ships to stop a single enemy vessel that was already half destroyed when the engagement began. Admiral, Commander Veltar said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. They're requesting information about their exploration ship. Tell them. Kethvar paused, trying to find the words. Tell them their ship completed its mission. Their crew died with honor. Sir, they're also transmitting what appears to be a diplomatic message. They're requesting formal negotiations for a peace treaty. Kethvar studied the star chart showing the location of the human home system. Earth was a single planet with a relatively small population and technology that was centuries behind Zephyrian standards. By all military logic, it should be an easy conquest. But the crew of the Defiance had demonstrated that humans didn't fight by military logic. They fought with a ferocity and creativity that turned every engagement into a learning experience for their enemies. Every battle with humanity would teach them more about Zephyrian weaknesses, more about how to exploit their tactical doctrines, more about how to turn superior technology against itself. Sir, your orders regarding the human diplomatic request? Kethvar looked at the debris field where the Defiance had made its final stand. A single human ship had forced the entire Fifth Fleet to develop new tactics, had inflicted casualties that would take months to replace, and had demonstrated that humanity was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. If one ship could do that much damage, what could an entire fleet accomplish? What innovations would they develop when fighting became a matter of species survival? What new tactical doctrines would emerge from a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting the art of asymmetry?